And usually when the master of cinema, Martin Scorsese, says that certain movie is one of the scariest he has ever seen, in his opinion, you have to get curious. Then when you are in the mood to watch a horror movie, possibly one that has supernatural elements, this is the probable movie that you have to go after. This is when I found a movie that I've never heard before, from 1982 called The Entity. But then usually when you take a chance on a movie like this that you don't have any other reference besides the opinion of Martin Scorsese, it might be one of those nights that you go, oh, I made a huge mistake. But in this case, this idea couldn't have been farthest from reality. Cause in this case, I only said, bingo, that's exactly the experience I was looking for. My name is Gustavo, but you can call me Gus, and let's go. The Entity from 1982 is directed by a director called Sidney J. Furie, a guy that was very prominent in the 80s, and after this movie he directed nothing less than Iron Eagle, an action fighter jet movie that was released in the same year and also crushed by Top Gun. Then 1 year later he directed nothing less than Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Probably the worst in the series with Christopher Reeve. And yes, if you have a good memory, this is the movie where Superman fights the Nuclear Man. So I got even more surprised to know that the director of this movie also directed those movies that are kind of sloppy directed at best. Although very fun, of course. But also directed a movie that was in the list of scariest movies according to Martin Scorsese. And the story of this movie is about a woman called Carla Moran, that is a single mother with 3 kids. Besides being a very hard-working woman, she also goes to the college at night and arrives very late at home to go back to her kids. But she lives a very normal life, until a certain day when she is getting ready to sleep, a very bizarre and supernatural event happens with her, also in a very violent manner. And yes, although the scene is very well edited to not show you very much, if you realized that she is being actually abused by this spirit, you are right. And as any normal person, after such an event, you have to move from your house because it is probably dominated by some evil force like a demon. The problem is that poor Carla doesn't have much money, so she has to ask the help of a friend of hers, and when trying to explain what happened, she just doesn't find the words to really explain what happened in fact. And when she returns home to spend the night after going away with her kids, more attacks happen, even more violent and without her control. And this evil force actually traps her and holds all her members while the abuse occurs. Then the attacks continue to happen, sometimes not even in a sexual nature, but just doing something cruel to the woman, like driving her car without her control and almost killing her on the road. And this is when she is taken to a doctor, a guy named Dr. Phil, and she tries to explain the whole situation for him as well, even showing some purple marks that the spirits left on her skin, but without an answer of who or what is doing this to her. And Dr. Phil, that is a nice guy with good intentions and even starts to develop some affection towards her, tries to help her in many ways, including taking her to specialists, to the university of the hospital that he works, so she can tell her story and they might come up with a solution for that. And in this first act of the movie, The story plays with the idea that maybe this is all something from her mind, because the doctors come to the conclusion that, due to her life story, for being a single mom, for having 3 kids from 2 different fathers, adding to the fact that she has a boyfriend now, and also that she reveals to Dr. Phil that during her childhood, her father did some improper things to her, if you know what I mean, it's possible that she might be developing some kind of disturb, bringing the trauma back from her dad in the childhood and also from the abandonment of her ex-husband, and is manifesting all of this in a sexually disturbed way. But then in the second act, it becomes clear that this is no disturb of hers. There is indeed an evil force there that is chasing her wherever she hides. And this spirit gets to the point of actually hurt and touch some other people around her, so then she gains other witnesses around that now can contribute to her story. So let's see, what really fascinated me about this movie is that it starts as a psychological horror and starts to develop into an investigation plot, mixing the elements of psychological studies being brought by the medicine with supernatural studies brought by ghost hunters. Basically this, and starts to develop this element of a collision between these 2 ideas, the medical science and the spiritual science, because the doctors want to find a psychological solution for her problems, but as she gains witnesses to contribute to her story, while Dr. Phil still insists that she must heal mentally, Carla ends up going after other ways to solve the problem. This is when she coincidentally finds these ghost hunters, or actually university students, that will go to her house and help her unravel these supernatural events. All these subplots remind me a lot of The Exorcist, when Regan McNeil's mother of the possessed girl, starts going from doctor to other doctors and many other doctors to find an explanation to her daughter's problem. But then, as a last resort, she is forced to go to the religion. And here Carla unites with these guys from the university that are actually students of the supernatural. So this is a fascinating element of the story. Then in the second act of the movie, you have this movie that started as a psychological horror, becoming almost a sci-fi with horror and supernatural elements, with these specialists making many experiments in her house to detect some kind of ghost or supernatural event, reaching the point of actually seeing some kind of representation of this evil spirit in the bedroom. An element that is very similar to the movie Poltergeist that was also released in the same year as this one, but here things are taken with much more realism. Another positive point of this movie is the realism and naturality of the natural elements of the movie, meaning the normal life of the characters, the interactions between them. As The Exorcist, for example, all the dialogue is very natural and realistic. There are no caricatures in here. The movie deals very well with who is each of these characters in the story, especially the protagonist, Carla, who is played wonderfully by the actress Barbara Hershey. And she has a very difficult job in the construction of this character, because she starts as a woman who is not believed by anyone, to the point that she actually starts to question if the whole thing is a disease from her mind. So she starts to become sicker and sicker as these attacks continue to occur, to the point that she becomes without any support and defense against this evil, and when she realizes that the doctors won't believe in her, she decides to even cooperate and accept these attacks from the evil spirit, since there is no other solution. This until other people in her life also witness these supernatural events, like her kids first, then her best friend. So when she gets this support and also gets together with the supernatural specialists to detect what's happening inside the house, she gets a breath of fresh air and becomes confident to face this evil force for once. Obviously, the spirits won't be shaken with her counterattacks and will continue to do more absurd and violent things to screw with the woman's life, which turns her in the third act, which means the climax, into a woman that is almost hopeless but still decides to fight this evil once for all. And before I can talk more about this ending, let me also mention what are the things that actually makes people disturbed while watching this story. Like I said, it is a horror story, but that also has these realistic tones, and with the whole discussion of medicine versus spiritual. But what really is disturbing in this story is this whole idea of the unknown. Once again, is the reason why we fear movies like The Exorcist, for example, because of the fear of the unknown, of what you can't explain. And even though there are scenes in the movie that flirt with the idea of showing this whole evil force, it is never shown. It's just an evil force that somehow decided to attack this woman in specific, with no reason or explanation of what the hell does it want with her. And that's what's scary. It could be anybody. Another thing is this whole idea of something attacking you in the comfort of your house without your control. So in the place that you should be safe, there's something there that is going to attack you and there is nothing you can do to defend yourself. There aren't many things in horror movies or in movies that have this element of supernatural that actually makes me scared. But in this movie, I have to admit that I got very disturbed and very bothered. I could feel the agony of the character Carla along with her, because the spirit attacks her in random times, but usually it waits for her to be alone, and when it happens it's just savage and merciless. Plus, these scenes also have a soundtrack that is even more savage. It's a very well composed soundtrack, because in these scenes in specific, it looks like it is attacking Carla along with the spirit. It has this continuous and strong beat that it looks like it is trying to attack your senses as an audience. And now talking about the ending, so from now on there's going to be spoilers, you have been warned. It becomes clear that even though the supernatural specialists have acted in her house, the demon won't leave Carla's life, reaching the point of actually ruining some of her relationships, which is kind of understandable due to the context of the whole situation in the movie. I don't think many people would want to be near a person that has this curse around her all the time. But even with this, the ghost specialists create some experiments to finally catch these spirits once and for all. Using some high-tech devices, they construct this extremely faithful copy of Carla's house inside the university that they study, that actually is in the same building that Dr. Phil works. And this copy of Carla's house has some traps to actually catch the ectoplasma of the ghost. I know the name is not ectoplasma, I'm using some language from Ghostbusters here, but the intention is to capture the energy of this spirit. And I know it sounds a little ridiculous, me describing this scene, taking into account the whole realism of the movie so far, this whole idea of a house to capture the spirit, But it is actually a very well done and tense scene, because in the midst of all, the spirit starts to control the machines of the specialists and use them back against Carla. So it becomes a very intense climax because she herself gets trapped inside this house, but then Dr. Phil enters in the middle of the whole thing, and playing the hero, he is able to remove her from the house, and then the specialists are also able to capture the spirit inside a huge crust of ice. Something that proves to the doctors in the place, that is Dr. Phil and his boss that are watching the whole experiment, that there is indeed something supernatural around that woman. But then the spirit is able to break and escape from the ice crust, and then he returns to Carla's house. And the movie ends like this, with Carla knowing that the evil is still inside her house, although she doesn't fear it so much now. In fact, she keeps moving on with her life. Then came the biggest surprise of the movie for me, because it is actually based on real facts. Not only based on real facts, but is also faithfully adapted from a real story about a woman called Doris Bither, that in the 70s she also suffered the attack of these spirits, and basically all the events portrayed in this movie happened with her. She went after the specialists, they tried to trap the spirits, there were indeed experiments done in her bedroom that showed some strange lights flying inside the room. All her story can be found in other videos in YouTube. There are actually other good videos talking about her history, and the movie itself finishes with a description of what happened to her. It is said that the attacks continued to happen, but then Carla moved on for other houses, and then the attacks start to decrease in frequency until they actually stopped. So if you got afraid of the whole idea of this movie, thinking that it was just a movie, I'm sorry to inform you that it is also based on a real story. Certainly other details were also adapted to make the movie a little more cinematic, like this whole idea of the copy of the house to make a bigger climax. But people say that the whole thing was very faithful. There was only another detail that I noticed that they adapted, is that in real life, Doris Bither actually had 4 kids with 4 different husbands. So even though the whole thing is based on real facts, I understand why they changed that, because the people who don't know that this was a real story would find very absurd this detail in the movie, although sometimes real life can be more absurd than movies themselves. This is also a movie like many others that deals with the supernatural idea, that the making of had some strange occurrences. For example, there is a scene where Carla is attacked by the spirits, but her kids witness the whole thing. Then her older son tries to help her, trying to remove the spirits from over her, although he can't see anything, and the spirit actually knocks him back. And in the story, the boy breaks his arm, but the actor who did the scene also broke his arm in this scene. So it's a very strange and curious fact that is even more weird taking into consideration that also happened in the real story. And talking about this scene in specific, it is the first time that the movie shows the visual representation of the spirit in the house, represented in these electric discharges in the air. And this is probably the only flaw with the movie for me. But it's a small flaw, because it's not shown very often, but every time the spirit is visually manifested and appears for the people around, it kind of breaks the whole immersion of the story for me, because I prefer when the thing is not shown at all, especially because the fear of the unknown that I mentioned. But these are minor flaws in a sea of positive things only. And I don't think this is just a good movie. I think this is a great movie. Very well crafted and directed. It's hard to believe this director is the same guy from Superman 4. Because like I said, it is a sloppy directed film, and here the direction is just masterful. The events escalate in such a a great pace that the immersion in the story along with the characters is just inevitable. Not mentioning the naturality of the characters, how they sound so authentic, and even with the jump scares that scare everyone with the loud bangs of the sound effects, they are also masterfully done, because despite you knowing that is going to happen, the whole idea of the spirit's invisibility and the whole tension of the scene is so well done that it gets you even though you are waiting for it. And this is The Entity, a movie that I fell in love completely, is a huge discovery for me, and that unfortunately is not very mentioned because it was released in the same year of Poltergeist in 1982, and everybody remembers Poltergeist a lot more. And I like Poltergeist, but I think is much more exaggerated. And I think the covers and the posters of The Entity didn't help the movie much because they look like some kind of supernatural erotic movie, I don't know. But talking about my personal taste for a horror thriller, this one beats Poltergeist at all angles for me. What about you? Have you ever watched The Entity? Please comment below, and also don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like in this video if you are enjoying this content of Trashing with Gus. And also don't forget to check the link of my ebook on the sites of Amazon, my first novel, The Angel of Fire and Steel. Since we are talking about demons, if you like this kind of stories, but in this case that takes place in hell, but that also is a huge action epic and with a lot of dark fantasy, you're gonna love this book. The link is down here on the description of the video, and buying a copy, you will be helping this channel to keep going so we can keep trashing together. And this is it for now, guys. Thank you so much. See you in the next Trashing with Gus, and bye bye.